So I wanted to help parents prepare for an IEP. And what does being prepared mean or look like? So I'm going to introduce you, and then I figured we'll go into explaining that.
Sure.
For those of us that have been involved with special education system for a while now, we know that every year we're going to have a meeting. But I swear, every year I still feel like I'm reacting rather than being proactive. So I was like, if I feel this way and I'm kind of involved in the special needs world, I wonder how other parents feel. So let's reach out to the expert, and someone I think is an expert, or is an expert, Amanda. So I wanted Amanda to help, and I hope that everyone else finds this information valuable. For those of you that may not know Amanda Morin, please allow me to introduce you. She's an author, an in-house expert for Understood.org, a former early childhood educator, and a parent advocate. And along her career, she has also written for us previously. We're so grateful to have had her. I love the way Amanda gets it. She is also a special needs mom. She provides a clear understanding and breaks it down for the rest of us to understand the various situations or processes, while at the same time provides us with takeaways and action steps. Thank you, Amanda, for being with us today. I'd like to approach this episode by doing kind of a before, during, and after being prepared, for an IEP. So if we begin with part one, like kind of being prepared and organized before the meeting, I thought I would ask you, what does being prepared mean?
Well, it's interesting. First, I wanted to say that I totally understand what you're saying about feeling like you're overwhelmed doing this, and you've been doing it for a long time. You said I have kids with special needs too. I have two of them. The oldest of whom, I have three children, but the oldest of whom who has special needs is 15. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm still overwhelmed going into meetings.
I'm going to share at the very end with you. My daughter's 21, and I was going to ask you, I'm going to share with you. I got the paperwork yesterday asking for the IEP meeting. So there's a question at the very end that's going to tie all of this in. So yes, I still feel overwhelmed. So yes, I hear that.
Which I think is one of the reasons I'm always trying to provide takeaways and actionable steps, because it's great to know it, but what do you do with it, right? So that's where we sort of start. And for me, preparing for an IEP meeting is really different depending on where you are in that journey. I'm not a big fan of the phrase journey, but I think it's the best way to explain it. I live in Maine, so for us, journeys always have road bumps and potholes and things like that. So your journey is going to have potholes and sort of smooth stretches along the way.
All the time.
Right. And so I think for some people, preparing is just knowing what an IEP is to start with. Because for some people, if you may have your child has a bunch of evaluations and a testing and somebody is working with them, and then you're sitting down at a meeting with all of this paperwork in front of you, telling you about what your child looks like on paper, and talking about what that means in terms of their school. And that's your first IEP meeting, and it can be overwhelming to sit down and look at all of this, because the way you know your child isn't necessarily what they look like on paper, right? So I think I would back up and say one of the things that's really important to do is make sure that you have copies of those evaluation reports ahead of time. Make sure you have copies of all the information that's going to be discussed at the meeting. And by law, you can look at that. I think it's up. They need to provide you access 2 days in advance, at least 2 days in advance. Most school systems will send it to you with a lot of time to give you an idea. But as a parent, I'm trying to think through how to sort through all of this. As a parent, you're an important part of that team. And that's by law, too. You're an important part of the team. And your input into what you know about your child has to be considered when you're creating a program for your child, which is that individualized education program, which IEP stands for. Right. So I think the first thing is to be prepared, having all the paperwork in front of you. Go through it with a highlighter. If there are things you don't understand, highlight it, put a sticky note on it, and write out what your question is. What is it you don't understand? And a lot of times for me, it's always, what does this mean practically speaking?
Okay.
Right? So what does this mean for what we do in the classroom to help my child. What does this mean in terms of the growth he's going to be able to make? And I say he because my two IEPs are boys.
Right. Well,
it could be a she, right?
Yeah, so, it's either way.
Yeah, and I think that's a start, is to start by looking at all of the information you have, and also have your questions ahead of time. And I think that there are a lot of questions you can be asking for an IEP meeting. And I think the first is, what's the goal of this meeting? Why are we sitting down here together? And I don't think that has to be a adversarial question. I think it's just an informational question. What is it we're all intending to get out of this? And by us, it's that team, it's teachers, it's you, it's whomever you bring with you to be a support person, which I would really recommend. Right. To have somebody with you, if not just to take notes, but also just to hear the same things you're hearing, to ask similar questions, those kinds of things. I don't know about you, but I've walked out of so many meetings feeling like I have no idea what just happened here.
I was thinking that was such a great point that you just, we really need to highlight that, because it's so true. I normally do assemble a team that people don't really, don't always do that if they're new, but I think it's important to bring people with you, because I think, just like you're saying, it's your child, and sometimes you can't hear. I'm not saying you can't hear, but you don't always understand, or you get, you miss important points of what was being said. So I think it's good that somebody else can take notes and help you.
Right, and I think, even for people like us who have done this for a long time and do it professionally, it's hard to separate the emotion from the practical component of it. And sometimes you just want to be the parent, and having somebody else there to help you take notes on what you're hearing gives you that opportunity to, and I don't know how many times in a meeting I've said, I'm sorry, I'm really emotional here. Give me just a minute. I think it's okay to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, to let people know. Because I think I've cried a couple times and I still feel, terrible, you shouldn't break down, but sometimes it is your child, and sometimes the way they deliver information is not easy to hear.
It's not, and I think it's interesting you say your child is at the end of that IEP timeline, right? I know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry now.
That's okay.
But I think when you're just starting, so my youngest is 7. Mine are 7, 15, and 21, so they're all across the board. Right. But my youngest is 7, and we're just starting this. And for me, I have to separate. So when I ask what the goal of the meeting is, I have to be really careful not to think about his entire future all at once. Okay. And I think that's important for parents to know too, that it's okay to just think about what we're talking about today. What does this mean for the next few months? It's really important to know what the most recent IEP says, and if you're going to make changes with it. Mm-hmm. I think that it's also important to make sure that you know what it is you want to say about your child. What are your strengths? What are the strengths and lovely things about your child that that the team who is just meeting that child may not know? Right, and I always make a point of letting people know that both of my sons have a really enormously fun sense of humor, and if you want to connect with them, that's your way to do it. And I think that's important information, right? Because if you need to connect with the child that you're teaching, and as a parent, I have that information. I can say, if you can make a joke that he's going to get, he's going to be on your side from now on. You've got your in there already.
The IEP binder, which I know you guys at Understood, or you've done it, but for understood.org, an excellent video that kind of explains, putting an IEP binder together. But can you kind of give us a little bit of a few tips or some things you recommend?
Sure. So interestingly, that IEP binder is based on one that I did at home with my own child's paperwork. I brought it into the office one day, and everyone was like, "Ooh, let's look at this and see what it looks like.
Let's steal it." No,
let's steal it. Yeah. And then I wrote up how I put it together. And what I do with that binder, and I'm sure that we can provide the video and the article to go with.
We'll put a link in.
Yeah. What we do is I separate it out into sections. So I have sections of evaluations, previous IEPs, and prior written notice, which are all the notes and so forth. Okay. Any communication that comes home between me and the teachers. I have a communication log where I'm logging all of the times I talk to somebody on the phone, and I log what we're talking about, what was discussed and what was decided. In part for my own ability to remember that.
Right.
And in part because I think it's important when you have an entire team to be able to say, I had this conversation with Mrs. Smith. You may not have been a part of that conversation. Let's tell you what we talked about.
Right.
You can go back to your notes and refer to it. Anything that you have on behavior plans, I put in another section. And what I tend to do is I put each section chronologically. So the most recent information is on the top, so I can flip through and find it. I will tell you that not everybody organizes their IEP binder the same way. Right. And a lot of times, if you're in a situation where you're going to mediation or due process, it makes more sense, and people will ask you to have your binder, all your paperwork together, organized chronologically. So not separated out by particular sections, not separated out by IEP or by evaluation, but every bit of the paperwork that you have in chronological order. So, I mean, I think for your own purposes, it depends on why you're organizing it.
So you're saying, just make sure I'm clear, if you had to go through due process, they would request that it went from 2000 to 2018? Or they could have it, because I think I set it up similar to how you do, because I want to find the most recent information first. So I go to my file so I can get what was just said, not go back.
Right. And I what I'm saying is I think most of the time, if you have an advocate or attorney who is working with you for a due process hearing, that's how they organize the records, is completely chronologically. So, which I mention because I think it's important, because some people will need to know that. For me, it's not helpful. I mean, as a parent going in, I need what's ready and necessary on top. And I have sort of a stack of binders, because each year I tend to switch them out and collect them. It's like, some people have photo albums. We have IEP binders, shelves.
So do you do a new one every year?
Excuse me. I tend to do a new one either every year or when the first one gets full. But what I'm doing is I'm making sure that if I switch it over for the new year, I have at least 6 months worth of information from last year in that IEP binder. So we can go back and make sure that we're talking about the same information.
Okay, and we will put a link at the, below this so that people can access the video that you've put together and some of the other links that we'll talk about, because I know you guys have a lot of information, which is fantastic, that you've put together.
I have, yeah. I feel like it's sharing.
It is. It's perfect. I love it. Okay, we're going to have to wrap up this show. Our time is up, but I cannot thank you, Amanda, enough for sharing with us. And I hope that you all will take action on one of the tips Amanda suggests. Maybe start by writing down some questions, or watch Amanda's How to Organize Your IEP Binder. You can also download our pre-IEP worksheet to help guide you as you prepare for your child's next IEP meeting. Print it out and start. Amanda, as I had mentioned, shared so much great information in this interview that I decided to break it up into 3 parts: before, during, and after an IEP meeting. I can't wait to connect with you all again next week. Next week's episode is about during the IEP meeting, what types of questions you should ask at an IEP meeting. She also shares some important points you don't want to miss. I'll see you here again next week. Bye for now.